everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to get started in a couple of minutes since a lot of us wanted to join us today from different parts in the world. We've been asking people to introduce themselves in the chat, maybe just say what you do and where you are connecting from. At the moment, we are already streaming live on Facebook, and this is the Facebook of the SOAS Film Society that was set up last year by some of my MA students at SOAS. And this was part of prolonging the course and making sure that their passion for film was there. We have Alex Lafosse joining us, and she's going to be sharing with us later her experience making a wonderful video essay at SOAS, one of the ones that really encouraged the production of this guide so that we could take this forward and beyond SOAS.
Yes, hello everyone.
Thank you so much for co-hosting this event with us, which is also co-hosted by Learning on a Screen at SOAS. And we are very well surrounded by people we will be there later introducing to all of you. My name is Estrella Sendra, and I work as Senior Teaching Fellow in Film and Screen Studies at SOAS, University of London, and as Teaching Fellow in Global Media Industries in Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton. Last year, I implemented for the very first time a creative assessment method, which was the production of video essays as an option as part of class presentations. And this guide is thought precisely for those people who are introducing themselves in the world of video essays.
Yeah. Great, thanks very much, Estrella. So I think, yeah, we can probably start now. So hello, everyone. Great to see so many of you. Welcome, and thanks for attending the official launch of the Video Essays Guide. My name is Bartolomeo Meletti, and I work as Education and Research Executive at Learning on Screen. Learning on Screen is a charity and membership organization which is specialized in the use of moving image and sound in education and research. And we've been around for more than 70 years now. And since our establishment in 1948, we always had the same vision, which is to make moving image and sound as important in education and research as the written word. So you can see, how video essays are really at the heart of our mission, and we are really grateful to Dr. Estrella Sendra and all the other contributors to this guide, which aims to offer a research-led introduction for students, teachers, and researchers approaching the video essay for the first time. So some housekeeping. As you can see, the event is being video recorded, and the recording is going to be made available via the Learning on Screen website. And as Estrella said, we are also live streaming the event from the SOAS Film Society Facebook channel. So yeah, if you don't want to appear on video, please turn off your camera. And also, as you will probably have seen on the registration page, we have a great lineup of speakers with us today who will introduce the various sections of the guide. And after those presentations, there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for our speakers, of course, feel free to post them in the chat, and we will try to address as many of them as we can at the end during the Q&A. So yeah, without further ado, thanks very much again for attending, and I'll now leave the floor to Estrella, who is the main author of the guide, and will give you a bit more context about the project.
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction. It was great to work with you and put together this guide. I would like to start from the very beginning and tell you how this guide came together. It was actually an idea that came up during a walk in a local park in East London during the lockdown, when I was just asking Bart some questions that had been raised by students last year. And this concerned mainly copyright issues, right? When we are compiling films and so on. So initially, it was just a guide that I was going to make available for my SOAS students in our online virtual learning platform. But then, thanks to Learning on a Screen, I was granted a wonderful space to make sure that this was also accessible beyond SOAS. And this also brought new opportunities. And I think that this is possibly why we are very much talking here today, and so honored to be surrounded by these practitioners and creative academics. The guide has now become a gateway to gather together the very existing and inspiring work on video essays. So it's a way that puts together all these different resources, which is absolutely brilliant. Video essays encourage creativity, but more importantly, involve action. They have a transformative dimension. They foster collaborative environment where students and teachers become co-producers of knowledge. But they require a willingness to take risks. And I realized I hadn't given enough guidance. So other than assisting in the production of video essays for those who are introducing themselves in this field, I think that what this guide does as well is to encourage some reflection on our pedagogic practice and creative practice. But without further delay, I would like to introduce us to our first speaker, who is Professor Tracy Cox Stanton, who will present our first section in the guide and speak about the value of video essays. Professor Tracy Cox Stanton is a professor of cinema studies at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. She is the founder and editor of the online journal The Cinephiles, which has regularly featured both scholarly work on video essays, but also video essays themselves. And she began practicing the video essay herself in 2015 after attending the inaugural Middlebury workshop on a scholarship in sound and image. Her most recent work, Gesture in A Woman Under the Influence, a charting of relations, what was published last year in Nexus. Thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank Bart and Estrella for this invitation to be a part of this project. It's such a cool project. I think I'm really looking forward to using the website in my classes now. It was great to hear your discussion of the origins of this project as well, because it reminded me of the Cinephiles itself, which I think points to some of the cool opportunities that the internet has brought our way. Things that were once in-house are now everywhere, and are now public and are now collaborative, just like this event now, to see all these people in the chat from all over the globe. It's a cool opportunity. So the Cinephiles kind of started the same way, in that it was going to be just an in-house publication for my classes, and then suddenly I realized, why don't we just put it online and invite all sorts of people? And now it's a whole other thing. So I'm speaking about the value of video essays. So I wanted to first kind of situate, where I'm coming from when I'm thinking about the value of video essays, and that's probably obvious, but in academic context. But I think that's worth saying because video essays have value outside of that as well. I think I was sort of jokingly telling someone, I think for some places, what is the value of a video essay? What is it, maybe $200 or $300? But that's not at all what we're thinking of when we're thinking of the value of a video essay. So the value of a video essay, for a sort of academic context, is really about how videographic writing and learning can kind of extend the goals, the learning goals that we already have. So we already exist within film and media studies programs. So I think that this is an easy job to explain why there's the value to video essays. And I want to think about them within this context in sort of two kind of separate but significantly overlapping realms. And one is more a sort of process, more of the learning, or what we might call discovery. And then the second one is in the more product, the product itself, the video essay that's done at the end of all of that learning and discovery. Because I think it's useful to think of those as separate activities, even though, as I said, they do significantly overlap. So first of all, I'm thinking about the process of video essays, the sort of learning that happens through discovery, through putting films into editing software. So I think this can't be underestimated, the value of just that in itself, even if one never makes something that they might call a video essay after having done that activity and playing with it. So I think there's great value in play with film. This changes our relationship to the cinema. I'm extending here the ideas of Laura Mulvey in her book, Delayed Cinema, when she talks about how a whole sort of era of film theory, apparatus theory, came out of a certain relationship to the cinema that is completely changed now, and completely changed through, first the VCR, the ability to sort of stop a film, start a film, rewind, have it in your own home setting rather than this sort of sacred place of the cinema where you experience it in one sitting. So think about how immensely that has been extended now with the video essay, and that not only can we stop and start, but almost everyone with a laptop can re-edit a film, can edit together separate films that were never meant to be put together, can put screens side by side. So I think that this this results in great insight. There's a lot of learning that happens, great value in just doing those activities. So in teaching a film class and having students play with the films, have ideas, have readings, have scholarly readings, and then play with the films in that context is enormously valuable. So then there's the second step that often happens after that, or sometimes during that process of expression. What I call the video essay is expression itself. So there's the learning, the discovery, but then what do I do with that? I want to express that my insights to an audience, and I might then create what I would call a video essay. So we remember, I think it's useful to remember the origins of the term essay. The French term comes from a verb, meaning to try. And I like to extend that a little bit to say to experiment. So the first part is about that experimentation, that putting things together. And then the second is imagining an audience and conveying insights to an audience. So this is where the video essay can supplement, or can perhaps sometimes replace, the traditional scholarly essay. And I think it has some really interesting and innovative things that it offers that are different from the traditional scholarly essay. I think it's a really good way of involving collaboration. I think Estrella had mentioned that as well already. That word has come up because when you want to express with the video essay, you need to test that with an audience. Right, so the classroom becomes a lot like a studio classroom. Even the scholarly traditional film history classroom, when it involves video essays, can become a lot like a studio, and playing things and talking about them. So through that collaboration, there's great insight and value. There's also, I think, that the video essay as a mode of expression has an easier time handling density and complexity in arguments, maybe. Perhaps just because you can do two things at one time. The audio track can say one thing and the video track can say something else, which is very difficult to do in a traditional written work. And it's also good at conveying a personal voice. Sometimes that's very literal, when you have an actual voice speaking. But even when not, there's always a sort of way that the speaker, the creator, is in the video in ways that we might have been sort of squelched in traditional writing to eliminate ourselves in some way. Not always, but in sort of traditional scholarly writing. So I think that the video essay offers a lot of potentials to extend the sort of values of the traditional film studies classroom, but in a creative and innovative and interesting way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much for your great presentation. That was the perfect introduction, I think, to today's event. So thanks again for joining us and contributing. I'm now going to present the next speaker, who is Dr. Charlotte Crofts. Charlotte is an associate professor in filmmaking at the University of West England in Bristol. And she's also a filmmaker and a creative producer, as well as the editor-in-chief of ScreenWorks, which is the online peer-reviewed journal of screen media practice research. Charlotte is on the executive committee of the British Association of Film, Television and Screen Studies, and also on the editorial board of Open Screens. So thanks again for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I can't really top what Tracy said. She's kind of said everything that I wanted to say. My background is academic publishing and thinking about this as an academic medium, but of course these kinds of work get published in non-academic forums as well. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a very good episode of the video essay podcast that Will, who's speaking later, did on publishing the video essay, in which he talked to Michael Leader of the BBC's Inside Cinema and Adam Woodward of Little White Lies and Justin Broeren of Filmkrant. And what I took from that, which I think still applies to academic publishing, and it's following on from what Tracy said, was very much that a video essay is something that extends and amplifies, or it's not just reading out an essay with putting some pictures on it. And I think it's really, really important. And I really like what Tracy said about it being able to handle complexity in interesting ways, because you can have more than one layer. And I wanted to say something about that, because I feel as though when your voiceover is just replicating what is on the screen, that is a very boring essay, and something that we might not want to publish, because it's just like you're just reading out an essay over some pictures. What I'm interested in is when those images butt against what we're hearing, and that what we're hearing might not be voiceover. And also side by side, when you can have things kind of challenging, and in a dialectical montage, there's all sorts of exciting things that you can do. In terms of academic publishing, just get to the boring thing. In the UK, research is defined as new knowledge effectively shared, which very much keys into what Tracy was saying about expressing insights to an audience. And the three, research criteria, significance, originality, and rigor are things that we think about when we're peer reviewing any practice research. So those are things that I would think about. But I think the key thing is thinking about how what you found through playing and manipulating these images on your timeline, perhaps in relation to some academic text that you're trying to unpick, what's the new stuff that you're excited about sharing, and how are you going to share that in an interesting way and challenge the actual formal and aesthetic properties of the video essay. I also teach the video essay. I have a module called the Independent Research Project, which can either be a traditional written dissertation or it can be a video essay. And the best ones are those who are trying to do something a bit different than just reading out an essay over some pictures. So I think that's really, really, really critical. And I think in terms of the peer review, as I say, how has you playing with those clips on a timeline shown you something new? What is the new knowledge that you're wanting to share? So those are the key things that I wanted to say. And I have said it all in a video, and I think that Christian's going to talk to that as well and say it much better than I will. For me, I'm just really delighted to have been invited to be part of this. As you say, I'm involved with ScreenWorks and Open Screens, and really trying to open up our discipline to using audiovisual means of research methodologies, but also dissemination. So it's really exciting that this guide is kind of thinking about those things. I think that's all I really need to say.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And you actually recorded for us a wonderful video in our second section, Finding Coherence Across Journals. Because many times when we make video essays, we are wondering, but what is it that examiners or editors are kind of looking for, and what is it that, how do I produce new knowledge? How can I contribute? So these are the typical aspects that we need to bear in mind that sometimes are not so clearly communicated. So I really recommend you to go and check that section number 2 in our guide. But now I would like to move to our next speaker, who also recorded a wonderful video for us, Dr. Shane O'Sullivan. We are here surrounded by speakers who are also contributors and content makers of this guide, even if not in the written form, but audiovisually, which is even more interesting. But just to introduce you to Shane O'Sullivan, he is a documentary filmmaker and senior lecturer at Kingston School of Art. His work includes 3 archive-driven feature documentaries on political history, which inspires his involvement in the AHRC-funded Make Film History project. His video essay, Anatomy of a Murder, Sirhan Sirhan and Robert Kennedy, was shortlisted for Best Research Film of the Year in the AHRC Films Award 2016. Thank you so much for being with us today and talk about section 3, how to make video essays. The screen is yours. I think.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, just a pleasure to be constantly do that. Yeah, it's great to be here with so many guests from all over the world, and thanks again to Bart and Estrella for inviting me. Yeah, I'm just going to start by sharing my 90-second film that I made for the guide, and then I'll just pick up a few points coming out of that. So I'm just going to share a screen with the video and let that play for 90 seconds and then come back to you.
Just as boys and girls are separated to learn their own special jobs in life, so at this school, they're taught to mix together free from self-consciousness.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing that and just move to my PowerPoint. Just to expand a little bit on that. Obviously, that's an entry-level video, just to kind of get the basics across. With British Council Film Collection Archive, that's available all over the world under Creative Commons non-commercial use. And so in terms of making video essays, I guess some of the key questions just to condense the guide would be, what film are you responding to and why? So it might be in terms of film scholarship from a particular feature film or series of feature films, or it could be some archive material. We offer 200 films from the BBC and BFI archive through the Make Film History project. So again, I work with students to kind of choose material to respond to from those collections. Then think a little bit about how does your research question add to existing knowledge in the field? So whatever it is you're responding to, mapping scholarship on that film or those particular directors or genres, and then figuring out where it is your research question fits into that and what your original contribution to knowledge might be. What form your response to your chosen film might take. Again, as Charlotte says, maybe moving away from kind of a voiceover reciting a written essay and using more sound and image to make your argument, not necessarily literally or through your own voiceover. So thinking about how you're going to construct that argument using image and sound, text or voiceover, what combination of those forms are you going to use? Whose voices are we going to hear in the film? Again, I go back to Laura Rascaroli here in terms of the connection between the video essay and the essay film, and filmmakers like Herzog or Agnes Varda. And really, I always say to students the difference between the conventional documentary mixing archive and interviews or found footage and interviews is really the subjectivity, so the strong authorial point of view put forward in the film, and also reflectiveness, so which is marked by trying to make sense of the world and explore a research question as you're thinking through the film. So thinking through some of the images and sounds and the form of the film itself. So I guess in terms of planning stages, it's not too different in a sense from the traditional documentary script. So thinking how you're going to structure your essay, what might be your establishing shot to set the tone or to draw us into the subject. And then thinking about your research question, how you're going to analyze it, either through text, voiceover, image or sound, and what your findings or what your conclusion are going to be at the end of the essay. And then if you want to submit it for one of the various journals, thinking about writing up your research question, the context in which you made it, and in which you situate your work, your approach, methodology, and your findings in a supporting statement with references. So you can go into more detail in the guide, but these are some of the key things you might plan in terms of making a video essay. And as I referred to earlier, the project that I've been working on for the last 3 years at Kingston, Archives for Education and the Make Film History project, which is kind of an offshoot of it, that is now trying to get young filmmakers from primary school up to kind of pre-entering the industry and working in a commercial mode, making archive material available to filmmakers in that educational, non-commercial context. Some of the partners that we have in the UK and Ireland are the BFI BBC Archive, Northern Ireland Screen, and the Irish Film Institute. So if you're working in the UK and Ireland, you may be able to access some of the 200 films available through the scheme for creative reuse, which basically means using up to 2 minutes of excerpts from these films as a starting point, or as a point of creative response for your own filmmaking, connecting your own filmmaking with our cultural heritage. So I think I'll stop there, and happy to take questions about that at a later point, but that just gives you a kind of an overview of the process.
Thanks so much, Shane. Thanks for your great video and great presentation. And yeah, I also familiar with the Archive for Education and Make Film History project. So yeah, let me encourage you, all of you, to, if you don't know it already, to visit the Archives for Education website. So I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, who is Professor Christian Keithley. Christian is Professor of Film and Media Culture at Middlebury College, and he's the author of Cinephilia and History, or The Wind in the Trees, published by Indiana University Press in 2007. Christian is also the founding co-editor of In Transition, a journal of videographic film and moving image studies, and is the co-author with Catherine Grant and Jason Mittel of the videographic essay Practice and Pedagogy. So thanks again, Christian. Now the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Hello from Vermont. A few days ago, I was at home browsing the Criterion channel and stumbled across a movie I hadn't seen in many, many years, Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill, a movie I saw when it came out. I was in high school, and it made a big impression on me. And part of what impressed me at the time, well, two things. Number one, the layers of tone in the film. There's the tone, this tone of suspense, a tone of comedy, a tone of irony. The other thing that impressed me was that at 16 years old, I was catching them all. I was very proud of myself. And I got to thinking about this in relationship to the project and videographic production and its relationship to traditional written scholarship, in which there is virtually no tonal variation and no tonal layering. We're all used to a kind of standard scholarly tonal presentation, let's say, in writing. Video essays sometimes do the same thing. They are guided in effect by that written model, but not all are. Some years ago, I wrote an essay that was in a volume called The Language and Style of Film Criticism, edited by Andrew Clevin and Alex Clayton. And in it, and I mentioned this in my section in the guide, I talk about, or I describe this opposition between videos that exist primarily in the explanatory mode and those are in more of a poetical mode. Quite honestly, if I had known this was going to get referenced so often, I would have tried to write it better. Because I think it's a vast oversimplification, even if still perhaps useful. But one of the things I'm mindful of is that videos along the continuum might or might not engage this practice with tonal variation, tonal depth that are present in the object of study in their film or television program or whatever they're working on. In my contribution to the guide, I talk about this very issue that I, in particular, and many of us at In Transition are drawn to videographic works that don't hold their objects of study at arm's length, but engage with them in some intimate way. They borrow the aesthetic features of the work for their own videographic work. And this involves borrowing tone or mixing and creating a new tone so that watching the video essay can be an experience not unlike encountering art, with tone marked by anger or wonder or perplexity. This gets at some of the things Tracy and Charlotte were saying earlier when Tracy was saying, video essays can do two things at once. And they can be operating, image and sound can operate against one another tonally, and it creates a much richer, more complex viewing experience. Also, Tracy pointed out the way in which videographic work, some of the best of it engages with the personal voice, and that means personal experience. And I want to mention two very quickly that I think are interesting works that activate this layering of tone, even though they exist partly in a poetical, partly in an explanatory mode. In the current issue of In Transition, there's a video essay called Tarkovsky's Napes. In fact, I will say that when the work was first submitted, I won't name names, to In Transition, I think a couple of my colleagues misread it because it's tonally complex. I think they were expecting something straight. I would also mention in the current issue of Cinephiles, Kevin Lee has a wonderful piece about a memory of seeing Platoon when he was a child. There's a dossier in there. I would encourage you to look at this on people making videographic works about films that traumatized them as a child. But in each case, there is the personal voice, and they are engaging with not only with an object that is a film, but with their experience of it, and with their experience of it at different times. And the result is a rich tonal layering that is something that I feel like the best videographic work should be striving for. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Christian. That was really fascinating and inspiring. I mean, my background is in copyright law, and I can say, you know, in these 30 minutes, I've already learned a lot. So thanks so much again. And I think it's actually my turn now. So yeah, my main contribution to the guide is the copyright section, which basically explains how you can lawfully use existing materials in creating video essays, especially under UK copyright law. So to introduce that section, I thought I would play a little rather silly mashup video that I created 8 years ago in 2012. And after playing that, I'll tell you about a couple of copyright mistakes I made at the time. So hopefully the video will work.
You're muted, Bart. You're muted.
So yeah, so that's, you know, short mashup I just showed was the Public Domain Orchestra playing Also sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss. And basically the reason why, you know, I created that video back in 2012 was to show the creative potential of the public domain. So, you know, the public domain is basically the pool of materials that everyone can use for free because their copyright protection has expired. And so, you know, my idea was to create a video made entirely of public domain works. So I had found this free-to-use recording of Also sprach Zarathustra on a website which said that the composition was in the public domain. So I downloaded that, and then I went to the Prelinger Archives, which is an American archive of ephemeral films, which are supposed to be in the public domain as well. And, you know, and then I created that mashup. And, you know, I thought, that video was lawful, that was the whole point while I made it. But then what I didn't fully realize is at the time is that copyright law is territorial, which means that, different rules apply in different countries. So, what that website said was true. The composition was in the public domain in 2012, but only in the United States because it was published before 1923. But in the UK, we have a different rule on duration, which is that works enter the public domain 70 years after the death of the author. So actually, Richard Strauss died in 1949, which means that that music became public domain here only on the 1st of January 2020, this year. So basically, when I made in terms of the music, when I made the video was unlawful. It became lawful 8 years later in 2020. Then, but then we have the same issue potentially for the videos, because as I said, I downloaded those videos from the Prelinger archives. Those videos, films, are likely to be in the public domain in the US, but I'm not sure, whether they're also in the public domain under the rule of life of the author plus 70 years in the UK. But here is when, other provisions of the Copyright Act come in, which are copyright exceptions. So copyright exceptions are basically cases in which you can use protected materials without permission from the copyright owner for specific purposes like education, research, or criticism or review. So like the fair use doctrine in the United States. And so basically, at least in the context of this event, I think that I can show that video, because basically I'm showing it to tell you about the territoriality of copyright law. So there is an educational value, and I think therefore I benefit from an exception called illustration for instruction in the UK Copyright Act. But similarly, basically you can rely on copyright exceptions also to create video essays. So in the UK, for example, there is one for research and private study that will allow you to use protected materials in your own video essays. Speaking of exception, and that's the second copyright mistake I wanted to mention. In order to rely on exception, I should also probably have included more detailed credits than those that you've seen at the end of the video. Because one of the requirements of most copyright exceptions is that you provide sufficient acknowledgement to the authors of the works that they're using. So now I think I comply with the exception by showing you the credits. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say. That's the kind of guidance you will find in the copyright section of the video essays guide, which is designed basically to help you create video essays that can be lawfully exploited within educational settings and beyond. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to put them in the chat box, and I'll be very happy to try and answer them in the Q&A. But now I think I'm going to introduce you to the next speaker, who is Will DiGravio. Will is the host of the Video Essay podcast and writes the weekly newsletter Notes on Videographic Criticism. In 2020, Will earned a Master of Philosophy from the Center for Film and Screen at the University of Cambridge, and he holds a BA from Middlebury College, where he studied videographic criticism. He also made a great video for our guide, which we just published today. So I encourage you to watch that. And so thanks again, Will, for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me and for that introduction. It's really a great honor to be here and to be asked to be included as part of this guide. I'll just quickly share the backstory of the podcast as a way of talking about why I think this guide is so fantastic. And that is, I was lucky enough to study under Christian Keithley at Middlebury College, and also Jason Mattel, where I was first exposed to this kind of work. And they would bring in speakers like Kevin B. Lee, who would share their passion for video essay, and it would always prompt these really great discussions. And then in the summer of 2019, I was the teaching assistant for their scholarship in sound and image workshop that they run, where they bring in a bunch of scholars. I think I saw Daniel Hipkins in the audience somewhere, who was a participant that year, and teach them how to create video essays. And the conversations there, as someone like Tracy will be able to tell you, are fantastic. And I was like, wow, this should definitely be shared with a wider audience. There's such a passionate community of people out there who love talking about this kind of work, as evidenced by the fact that I think we have 100 people on this Zoom call today, which is pretty fantastic. And so I was like, oh, this would make an interesting podcast, and also a way to kind of open up the conversation to folks who may not have the means to go to an academic conference, or perhaps they aren't lucky enough to be students currently and hear from guest speakers or professors. And that's kind of what I was thinking about as I was thinking about how great this guide is. Back in April, in the midst of the pandemic, and we're still in a pandemic, we, as part of the podcast, assigned homework to viewers where we assigned the exercises that Chris and Jason and Catherine Grant developed for that workshop to podcast listeners. And listeners over the course of, I think, 3 or 4 months made a combined 68 videos together. And during that process, I think it was felt by many that there was a need for a guide such as this. And so I think that's incredibly exciting that, you know, folks who aren't at universities will have the opportunity to make this kind of work. And I made the video for the dissemination page, and I talked about the great journals and publications that are out there for video essays and that have been talked about today. But I think for me, the most exciting thing about video essay making is that there aren't a lot of gatekeepers when it comes to video essay making. And the fact that anybody who has made a video and is really passionate about it can be a publisher thanks to Vimeo or YouTube, and also increasingly platforms like Facebook and Twitter. And so for me, that's what's really exciting. The scholar who I'm sure you're all familiar with, Catherine Grant, of course, has this wonderful phrase called working in the flow that I steal from her all the time. And it's this notion that as video essayists, we're constantly making videos, sharing drafts, posting excerpts to Twitter. And I think my closing words here would be, if you have a video essay that you're holding on to and that you'd like to get out into the world, I would encourage you to share it, even if that means putting draft in your title or putting in your bio, like, hey, this is a work in progress. Because there is a community of people out there who are willing to provide feedback, words of encouragement, and get you to the point where maybe your video will be ready for publication and you can send it to In Transition or the Cinephiles or a place like Sight and Sound or Little White Lies that are more on the journalistic side of the spectrum. So those are kind of my closing words. So thank you for having me here today. And I encourage everyone here to make a video essay and share it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. That very much aligns with Tracy's first point on the importance of experimentation. So I really like how you went back to Catherine Grant and spoke about this idea of working in the flow. And also, again, something that is really interesting is to this concept by Trinh Minh Ha of speaking nearby, something that Charlotte was mentioning, of working on the medium through the medium itself and touching it and manipulating it. This kind of experimentation is the same one that I kind of engage with as a teacher at SOAS. I was both teaching a BA and a master's course, and I was very kind of eager to include or implement this creative assessment method for the very first time and see how different class members responded to it. So again, like this guide came together as kind of like a way of acknowledging that even in the same way that universities do provide a lot of study skills on how to write essays and so on, there wasn't so much from the university on how to make video essays. And this is why we were like, okay, let's compile different resources that have been made by the grassroots, by creative researchers, by practitioners who are kind of making this field legitimate, and put them together for our SOAS students, and thanks to the Learning on a Screen platform as well, beyond SOAS, which is absolutely brilliant. But I feel I've already talked enough, reflected about the practice enough in the guide. You can read the case study of my experiment at SOAS in the last section of the guide. But really what I would like to do right now is to play an extract, kind of like a trailer of 3 video essays that were made last year, to show you the kind of amazing work that was made by students who themselves engage with video editing techniques and so on. And then hear the experience from our class members, because we have, as I said before, Alex Lafosse here with us. So Alex, get ready. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly, and then I'll introduce Alex and get started with that. So let me just do that. And there we go.
Can a film that was neither intended nor described to be feministic by its own director be a feminist film?
Once of a Journey. That was the video essay made by Alex Lafosse last year, awarded distinction, if I may reveal the outcome. She is a researcher in migration studies, as well as a journalist in an independent online media outlet that she co-founded a couple of years ago, which is called Witty News. And this aims to speak about migration differently, and was born from the initiative of refugee journalists and their French colleagues. She's currently pursuing her career into the film and documentary industry in relation to exile and the migratory issue. Thank you so much for joining us today. The screen is yours, Alex.
Hello, hi, thank you very much, Estrella. So yeah, there's a lot of things I could say about this experience with you last year at SOAS, especially because I was doing a MSc in migration, mobility and development, so I wasn't doing anything related directly to cinema and film studies. But for me, it was really interesting to talk about this exilic and diasporic films through these mediums. It means like the video essay. And for me, it was really a brilliant opportunity to convey theories differently. And it was the occasion to render academia creative, aesthetical, and also more accessible, especially because like these kind of films are very niche. And what I really enjoyed as well is to make some parallelism between the structure of an essay and the structure of a scenario, kind of, because in both cases you have to tell a story and with a specific structure. And yeah, I really like to create this encounter between both methodology. And I really also enjoy to look at the most suitable films, and also to play with the sounds as parameters, but both in the content, but also through the montage. And so I remember going back to the technical terms that we learned during our class, for example, about the different types of sounds and diegetic sounds and non-diegetic sounds. And so it was really a very, very good experience. And also I really like to put my voiceover. I could really engage with my audience and to create a sort of space of intimacy, which was really new to me, you know, because sometimes when we do a reading, especially in film studies, we can really feel a bit far from what we actually read, because the author mentions a lot of films, and sometimes we can have some difficulty to watch them at the same time. But so it becomes sometimes a bit abstract. And for me, video essays are a very good way to counterbalance this, and especially when images, sounds, etc., plays a very important role in the understanding of the film. So thank you very much for everything, because for me it was like very interesting, and I hope I will have the chance to make other video essays in the future.
Yes, I really look forward to those, and was happy to see one of the films that you were already making kind of building on this topic of queer cinema as a form of exile, as well as a psychological form of exile. But also something really brilliant about your short talk right now is your emphasis on how you became a storyteller, right? So how, again, like in the classroom, there is an environment of co-curation of the stories of film, which I think is really interesting. And again, I also like how you were highlighting this idea of intimacy, because it builds on this idea of what happens when we put ourselves playing around or toying with the film medium. We have now 10 minutes for questions and answers from the audience and feedback. It would be great as well to hear if you have had any experiences making video essays and you would like to share this with us. I know our colleague Lucy from Learning on a Screen has been monitoring the chat, so it would be great to have you with us right now to address some of these questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Estrella. So the first question we had was just after Shane's presentation, and it was from Daniel O'Brien, and he apologizes, it's a technical question, but he asks what's the best software to capture online and DVD film clips, please? And he's new to making video essays, so any advice would be welcome.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we need to ask Bart for permission on that. And maybe you want to clarify one of these copyright law exceptions so that people understand that when you are working with the medium for learning or research purposes, it is fine to do this. And we also speak about this in the guide. I do have some software to recommend once I'm allowed.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, accessing DVDs and works online is a rather complicated question from a copyright point of view. Yes, I mean, as Estrella said, most countries have educational exceptions. So like in the US, there is the fair use doctrine. In the UK, we have UK fair dealing exceptions. And most jurisdictions around the world have similar provisions that, yes, basically allow you to use protected materials for educational purposes. So, as long as you're using things within educational settings, you're mostly fine. Then, different question is, whether then you want to exploit, that video essay beyond educational settings. And there are other exceptions that you can rely on, like criticism or review in the UK, and again, fair use in the US. In terms of, accessing DVDs, I mean, I could talk about that forever. So I'm trying to find a way to, summarize it. But basically, the sort of kind of dangerous things is if the DVD you're trying to access as technological protection measures and you use software to circumvent those, and then that's an issue, even under exceptions. If what prevents you from using the content is just a contract, like the terms and condition of the service or the DVD, then under exceptions, at least in the UK, you can ignore that because the exceptions I'm referring to, override conflicting contractual terms and conditions. So yeah, then you can find about that more on the guide, and feel free to get in touch with me if you want to explore this in more detail. And yeah, I'm not aware. I mean, I can't tell you the technical answer, so I leave that to one of the other speakers on actual software.
Yeah, I'm happy to recommend one, which is ClipGrab. That one works quite well to download some of the videos that are available online. Again, something that is emphasized in the guide and that I always try to convey as well in my classes is that you shouldn't be using too much as needed to convey your argument, so that you don't put yourself in a blurry field and so on. So I guess that's also part of the experimentation. That's one of the ones that works, but then there's others that you can also find online. Yeah, I think would anyone like to build on that? Any of the contributors to the guide? I think, yeah, Christian is also sharing a resource over there. Thank you so much for that, on a workflow for ripping DVDs. I also have some for this over here, but I think that, again, like the copyright law in the UK and the United States is different in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think also there's a growing realization among archives that they want to make some of their archive material available for educational use and for non-commercial use. And kind of some of these projects help them work through a workflow that protects their films, but still allows this kind of uses if it's not for a commercial purpose. So you'll find that in the National Archives in the US, for example, they upload stuff to their YouTube channel in kind of 1080 or 720 resolution. So as long as you can get it, downloaded from YouTube, that kind of historical material is available. And yeah, on the FAQ section of Archives for Education, you can find a list of other sources of material, not feature films necessarily, but other public domain or Creative Commons material that you can use.
Mm-hmm. And there are other recommendations in the chat as well. Right, we need to move fast because we only have 4 minutes left. We also have in the guide our contact details. People have been emailing feedback. We have been also including more resources. You are very welcome to contribute to the guide. So Lucy, could you let us know about the next question, please?
Yeah, sure. So the next question, Estrella, you've sort of addressed a little bit already in the chat box, but it's from Alan O'Leary, and he's thanked us for the resource, which he says he's been recommending to his students. But he says that he thinks it's taken quite a conservative approach, and he's suggested, well, he's said, what about, say, Catherine Grant's material thinking approach, or Chris Keithley and Jason Mittell's parametric and deformative exercises taught at Middlebury?
Yes, thank you for that. I actually replied very briefly because I didn't have the time to read the whole feedback. So it's very good that you're reading it out loud. Again, I think I have addressed this. The guide had kind of like the aim of being very clear for people who didn't quite know how to go about it. And I think that once people situate themselves within video essays and in the timeline is when they start to realize, oh, my argument is changing. So I then encourage my students, for example, to reflect about those changes in the statement. And this is something new that wasn't there last year. Remember, Alex, you were just submitting the video and that was it. You were presenting in class about it. And that was it. But this year we also included the research statement to speak about, what changes once you are in the timeline and working with this. So even though there is a guide of what to do step by step, we from the very beginning said that these are just some guidelines in case you don't know where to start, but that creativity is encouraged. And even in the same briefs, we also say you can stop the video presentation after 1 minute if that's your point and the point that you want to make, or it can be completely black or full of grain, depending on what you really want to say. And some of those references that you mentioned are also listed in our About section, where there is a list of references where we also acknowledge the work on Catherine Grant and especially this idea of her that it is imperfection that distinguishes the video essay from a fiction film, for example, which is a really encouraging note, I think, from her work.
Okay, thanks. We have another two-part question from Nadia Mokada, sorry. And her first question is, there's a lot of discussion about the relationship between video essays and archive material, but what are your thoughts or suggestions for those who want to create a little bit of their own materiality, those videos that present more performative influences?
Great. I would like to welcome some of you who are editing work to respond to this, because I've seen many video essays, for example, in the ScreenWorks, where there are performances and so on. And so the use of unique and original footage. So would you like to address this, Charlotte?
Well, ScreenWorks doesn't just publish video essays, so we're very open to all sorts of screen media practice. But I think it has to have a research dimension, and it has to be more than just a recorded presentation kind of thing. But we're very open, because precisely what Alan's drawing attention to really is that I think we're trying to break new ground in the discipline of film studies and screen media studies. And therefore, we have a running deadline. We don't have like issues. We sometimes have special issues, but so we just want to be reactive and responsive to what people are actually doing, but also rigorous. So it's a balance between the two. So going back to, the whole idea of significance, originality and rigor, I didn't really talk about the research statement, but that's what the research statement is for, is in order to illustrate that. Because sometimes it may not be apparent in the actual video work itself. And that gives you an opportunity to situate it within that wider critical framework, which I think is really, really important. So I think there's a blurring between a video essay and other forms of practice on ScreenWorks. It's not just publishing video essays. I think Christian and In Transition are solely publishing videographic film criticism. So he might be better placed to, where have you gone? I can't find you on my screen.
Here I am. Does that help?
Yes. Yeah, so you might have a comment on this.
You're going to have to refresh. I was writing to Nadia when you were talking. So.
I think it was about that context of publishing screen media research that's kind of slightly a less traditional form of video essay.
Right.
You also record some footage, for example, and you include that as part of the way of reasoning.
This is something that has been important for us since In Transition was founded, is that we seem to, whenever there is, there are a set of norms beginning to settle in videographic essay work, we're excited to see something that pushes against it. We're very much drawn to work that tests those limits in experimental ways, so that we don't settle into some norms the way that written scholarship does, and it's some of what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if that fully answers your question. As I said, I was typing in the chat when Charlotte was speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because there was a very good question coming as well from Nadia. And again, and this one, the second part of her question ends with this one. How has it been for you to deal with the challenge of the academic legitimization of video essays? Maybe Tracy, you would like to respond to this one, because again, I really wanted to highlight when making these guides all that activism, all that grassroots effort that there's been from scholars like you who have been trying to find an academic space for this kind of videos. Thank you so much, Nadia, for your question.
Yeah, I think I see that Christian put in the chat. Thank you, Christian. The new issue of the Cinephiles the titles are unveiled, but all of the articles haven't been unveiled yet. So it's about a week coming, but that whole issue is about exactly this question. So you should certainly, that will be helpful in thinking about what do we mean by the scholarly video essay? So that's a term that we use a lot, but there's almost like a shorthand way that we've assumed that if I'm a scholar and I make a video essay, then it's automatically a scholarly video essay. But we're kind of asking the question then, why is there, what's at stake in that term, the scholarly? And as Nadia's question points out, there are sometimes some very concrete institutional things at stake in the term scholarly, what counts as scholarship. So several essays address that, and it's other people's ideas. So I don't want to convey them yet before they're published, but just look for that. There's one that's specifically about arguing for tenure as well. So I know that's a very concrete question. How do you argue that a video essay can count for tenure? So it's more theoretical questions as well as very concrete questions like that.
That shows that this is an ongoing conversation that hasn't quite finished yet. I understand we have already gone over time. This was an event that was meant to last for an hour. I wonder if there is anyone who would like to share any closing remarks before we stop the recording and the event. Charlotte, yes, please.
Well, it's a shameless plug that I've already done in the chat, but I think two of the people that are speaking at an event I'm running on the 13th of January are in the audience. One of them is Alan, who asked that question, and also Gemma Saunders. And it's the BAFTS Practice Research SIG, which is the British Association of Film, Television and Screen Studies Special Interest Group. And we've got one session on videographic film, and there's also another session with Orson Nava, which isn't about videographic film, but he's also in the audience, I think. So if you are interested in that, I've put the link in the chat. And also with Will, we collaborated on a thing about the journeys of Cary Grant, and we're still accepting if anybody in the audience likes Cary Grant and is developing a video essay on Cary Grant, we'd still love to have your submissions, and I put the link in the chat for that as well. And I really liked what Will said about wanting to engender, a very, giving it a go if you haven't done a video essay, which I think is what your guide is all about, Estrella, and congratulations very much on it.
On that note, thank you so much. As you have heard, there are other meeting points where to keep engaging with these questions, where to keep producing. And again, watch the video by Will on the dissemination page, because he's highly encouraging for us to experiment and to share. And I think that goes back to that idea of conveying something insightful to new audiences in an innovative and original way. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. And Bart, could you like?
Yeah, and yeah, let me thank you all again, also on behalf of Learning on Screen. Thanks to all our speakers and contributors to the guide. Thanks for joining us today. It's been extremely interesting. Thanks to all of you for attending and for your stimulating questions and interesting comments. I mean, we do really appreciate constructive feedback, as the comments we received today. So we'll definitely consider those also in revising the guide. And so thanks very much again. And yeah, we hope this is just the start of a conversation that will continue also in the new year. Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much. Take good care and keep in touch. Bye.